إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له جل عن المثيل والنظير وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أيها المسلمون عباد الله. In today's khutbah, inshallah, I wanted to speak about a turn of history that the Muslims should have learned from. An event that occurred over 900 years that we as Muslims should have been aware of, should have known about, should have never fallen to the same trap and trick again. But from the hikmah of Allah Azza wa Jalla, from His sunnah in this life, is that يُقَلِّبُ الْأَيَّامِ. One day is for you, one day is against you. There were days for the Muslims throughout the history of Islam that Allah Azza wa Jalla miraculously lifted this ummah and sent people to this ummah, to the aid of this ummah. And there are days in the history of Islam where we are large in number. You would assume we would never be defeated and we would never be overcome. However, we are weaker than we have ever been. Today, if you look around the world, 1 in 4 people, 1.7 billion people in the world are Muslims. If you do the maths on that, and if you look in comparison to other religions, no power, no religion, no group, no one should be able to defeat this ummah. By that logic, this ummah should have been able to support the sick, the needy, the hungry, should have been able to defend the third holiest site. This ummah should have never been in a position where wherever you look in the nations of Islam, there's wailing and crying. There are crying mothers. There are people that are suffering and struggling. Wherever you look around Islam, the people of the Muslims, you see weakness, you see scars, you see bruises. And no more so than the third holiest site of Islam, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. This masjid, around 920 or so years ago, this masjid was taken from the Muslims for the first time. In the year 1099, the Crusaders attacked Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and claimed the masjid for the first time. They damaged the masjid. They replaced the signs that were around the masjid with crosses. They destroyed the dome of the rock. And they desecrated the masjid. And in that time, if you will look and compare and see where we are today to where they were back then, matters aren't much different. Muslims were too busy with their inner affairs. The Dawlatul Abbasiyya, the mighty Khilafah of the Abbasis, had broken down. It was small subsections of leaders and there wasn't one unified body. If you looked at Egypt, which was one of the forces of Islam back then, the Amr ibn al-As conquered, it became a khilaf, or it became a kingdom that was ruled by Al-Fatimis, the Shi'as, and they were one of the people that were happy to see the Abbasi kingdom and khilafah suffer. If you look at Damascus, and if you look at where now Baghdad and these big areas that for a long time they were the pillars of the Muslim Khilafah and they were the pillars of the Muslim country, they were all run and they were all ruled by different parties. Yemen was taken by a group. Syria, to modern day Syria, which was Mosul and so on, back then was taken by another group. Modern day Iraq, which is Baghdad, was taken by another group. The Khilafah and so on was a whole small subsection. And in that time, the Muslims, majority of them, busied themselves with just ensuring that they are safe and that they are running their part. Majority of Muslim leaders were happy with their own little castle and fortress, and none of them had the vision and the thought to think beyond. None of them even thought and spared the thought for Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, to the extent where it said that the Khalifa didn't do anything about Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. That the Muslims of the area had to riot, had to come out, had to protest, so the Khalifa would acknowledge that Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa had fallen and been taken away from them. At that time was the first time that the Masjid Al-Aqsa was taken from the Muslims. During that period, and it lasted for 88 years, majority of these rulers continued looking after their own affairs and looking after their own matters. From the people that Allah Azza wa Jal sent for this ummah to return some of the glory and to return Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa was a man by the name of Nureddin Zinki. This man, he grew up in the area of Al-Mosul and he used to run the area, and from the people that he had supported and aided was a man by the name of Ayyub ibn Shadi. He'd supported him, he'd bought into his castle because he was kicked out from his original area known as Tikrit. This man, Nureddin Zinki, he had a dream, he had a vision that he would unite the Muslim fronts all and return them back to what they were, and then he would conquer Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And he was so adamant that he was going to conquer Masjid Al-Aqsa to the extent where he built the mimbar that he was going to give the khutbah on in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. He built this mimbar in around 1165, the year 1165, and Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa wasn't returned to the rule of the Muslims till 1187. So 22 years before it, he was preparing, he was planning, he was plotting to return and take back Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. His plan meant that he would send some of his soldiers, some of his people to the different parts of the world. So he sent from his people a man by the name of Salahuddin to Egypt. And over the space of few years, this man and his family returned and took back Egypt from what it was a Shia power to return it to a Sunni power. This man, Nureddin Zinki, from his might, from his wisdom, is that he started at a very young age. Or he started teaching people at a very young age. From the age of the madrasa, and it's said that he's the first person to start a system where the madrasa was more than just memorizing the Quran. It became about learning your religion, learning aspects of your religion, and teaching people about their deen. And this madrasa system was exported back to Egypt by Salahuddin and his nephew Yusuf ibn Ayyub, and over the space of the years they managed to take back majority of the Muslim lands and unify them. Now, this man Nureddin Zinki, from his dream and from his ambition was to return Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. However, what Allah Azza wa Jal had willed and had written for him is that he died at a sudden age. He died at a sudden age, and Allah Azza wa Jal hadn't allowed him to see his dream and hadn't allowed him to go back and actually fulfill his dream. In that time, when he died, the Crusaders were happy and they celebrated. They even attacked some of the other parts of the Muslim world, and a man by the name of Reginald, that was the leader of the Crusaders, had actually even attacked the Hujjaj and the people that were going to Hajj and coming back from Hajj. And he attacked a caravan of Muslims that were going from Egypt to Syria, and he killed over 200 of them. And when he killed them, he said to them, "Where is your prophet? Where is Muhammad? Who's going to stand on behalf of Muhammad between me and you? Either turn back from your religion, or I'm going to kill you. I'm going to sacrifice you for Muhammad." And he did. He killed all 200 of them without turning back, without any of them turning back from their religion. However, when this man, this is after the death of Nureddin, the man that we've said known as Yusuf ibn Ayyub, he swore by Allah that he is going to capture this person and he is going to kill him. He swore by Allah, he took an oath by Allah, and it wasn't a light thing to take an oath by Allah. After many of these people died, Salahuddin after the Fatimid rule was collapsed in Egypt, this man Yusuf ibn Ayyub became the leading figure in Egypt. And he continued the dream of Nureddin. He continued to go back. He went back to Syria, he went back to Mosul, to Baghdad, and he took back all of these parts. What used to happen back then in the Muslim world is that once a Khalifa or once a ruler would die, he would pass on the kingdom to his son. And this used to be the practice that used to happen from the time after the Khilafah al-Rashida, that the children would take on the practice. And this sometimes was a huge success because great men used to raise great men after them and they used to look after them. But other times, this used to be the demise of the Muslims, and this used to have a huge impact on the Muslims, because what happened was that some of them would pass it on to their kids, even though their kids were drunk, never used to pray Salah, and these used to be the leaders of the Muslim, Wallah al-Musta'an. Not much dissimilar from what it is today. Wherever you look at the Muslim world, you find the ruler that isn't fit to lace the boots of a ruler, but he's running the affairs of the Muslim. Wallahu al-musta'anu ala hadha. Now, what used to happen back then as well is that majority of the scholars of the Muslims would be captured. And anyone that would speak out and point out what would happen, they used to be captured and thrown into prison. This man Nureddin, when he passed away, he continued tradition, even though he was one of the greatest men. He continued the tradition and he passed on the kingdom after him to his son. His son is reported used to be 11 years old. And what used to happen when the child or the new king was too young, someone will become a custodian and someone will look after him until the king is old enough to run the affairs of the dawla. And this wasn't a abnormal practice. One of the greatest rulers of Islam, Muhammad al-Fatih, who conquered Constantinople, became the ruler and the leader at 14 years old. And then he gave up kingdom till he turned 20 or 21. However, he was looked after and he was nurtured by his father while he was the ruler. So this man, the young son of Nureddin, he was torn between who to appoint as his custodian. His his uncles would turn around and say, we will look after you. His cousins wanted to look after him. And they would all warn him of this man that is creating a huge leadership or a huge power and army in Egypt known as Yusuf ibn Ayyub. Eventually, as time went by, this man, Yusuf ibn Ayyub, decided that the only way to return al-Masjid al-Aqsa and to fulfill the dream of Nureddin was to remove all of the distractions in his way. So he went back from Egypt all the way down, surrounding the area that surrounded al-Masjid al-Aqsa, covering Syria and Iraq and so on, and gave everyone a choice. Either you join the army or we are going to fight you and take your land. Majority of the leaders ended up giving up to him and submitting to him. And this man eventually gathered the army that had 60,000 people and marched towards al-Masjid al-Aqsa. This man, Yusuf ibn Ayyub ibn Shadi, is the real name of Salahuddin Al-Ayoubi. His name wasn't Salahuddin, it was a title that was given to him. His real name is Yusuf ibn Ayyub ibn Shadi. This is a man that grew up in the madrasa system, memorizing the Quran at a very young age, memorizing the books of Al-Fiqh al-Shafi'i, learning about Allah Azza wa Jalla and His Prophet from a young age. And it's reported that this man had the dream of Nureddin, that he lived from him and learned from him, and eventually he didn't want to become an army person, but rather he wanted to be a scholar and a teacher. And he learned that, but eventually when the need was for him to turn away from that and turn into supporting the religion of Allah Azza wa Jal, he did so. And he gathered the army of the Muslims and he went back to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and he freed it. And he took with him the mimbar that Nureddin Zinki put up, and he placed it in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and it's still there till today. 900 years after, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa was kept in the rule of the Muslims until it was given up in 1947, unfortunately, and the same situation happened. The Muslims are weak, busy in their own inner affairs. Muslim rulers that are not fit for anything, and scholars are in prisons. And the Muslim ummah struggles. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to lift from us all of our struggles and to allow us to return to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله على إحسانه والشكر له على توفيقه وامتنانه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له تعظيما لشأنه وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Regardless of how great we are in number as Muslims, if we are disunited, and if every single Muslim is worried about their own little corner, everyone's worried about their food, their provisions, their family, without thinking about the greater purpose of us as Muslims, we will always be weak. And this is a lesson that we look at the story of Salahuddin Al-Ayoubi, and we know and we understand. And we don't have time to do the story justice because we are just taking glimpses of it at this khutbah, inshallah. However, once he unified the Muslims and he managed to get rid of some of the enemies of Islam, such as the Shia and so on, and he allowed the Muslims to come together under unified rule and unified army, he was able to return Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. This man Salahuddin Al-Ayoubi, his story, what made him special, what made him loved, isn't the fact that he was someone that returned Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, it's the fact that he's someone that did it with sincerity. He's someone that, as I said, when Reginald killed 200 Muslims, he swore by Allah to kill him. And when he captured him, the first thing he asked him, he said to him, are you going to accept Islam? If any of us were in that position, we wouldn't be able to hold our anger. We would slice his head. However, his first question was, are you going to accept Islam? Because his purpose, his underlying purpose is the Tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal and spreading the message of Allah Azza wa Jal. Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa for us isn't a debate who was there first or what ummah was there before us. This is the third holiest site of Islam. This is the Masra of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the Malqa of the Anbiya where the Prophets met. This is where the Prophet of Allah Azza wa Jal, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ascended to the heaven. This is the first of the two Qiblas. This is the third of the holiest sites. This is the place where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said a space or a prayer there is equivalent to 500 prayers. This is a place that Allah Azza wa Jal tells us that He's glorified and He's made it barakna hawla. He's put barakah around this place. So for us, this is a place that is a pillar of our religion in terms of sentimental value. It's a pillar of our religion in terms of religious value. It's a pillar of our religion in terms of our own heritage and where we as Muslims come and align. This is a place where Allah Azza wa Jal promised will return to the Muslims, and it will return to the Muslims. However, we look at the story of Salahuddin. His main concern, even though everyone around him was focused about themselves, his main concern was the Masjid Al-Aqsa. He dreamt about it. And it said that he didn't laugh or smile for over 40 years. And it said that he didn't enjoy food for more than that. And it said that he used to give away any wealth that he had for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, up until he freed al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. It said that Salahuddin Al-Ayoubi used to cry tears before he freed al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And he used to cry until his face would get wet. And then he would keep crying till his clothes would get wet, and he would continue crying till the space of his prayer would get wet. Why? Because of the concern he had for this ummah. After he conquered al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, or after he liberated al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, he stood at the beach and he said, Wallahi, if I know there's a way for me to go across the sea and spread al-Islam there until either everyone accepts Islam or I die, I would. And he died a few years after, and Allah Azza wa Jal didn't ordain for him to live on and to continue to spread Islam. However, the main message was for him to spread al-Islam and to protect the pillars of Islam, to protect the signs of Islam, to protect the places of worship of Islam. And he did so, and Allah Azza wa Jal preserved his name up until now. 900 or so years later, people still refer to him, people still talk about him. Allah Azza wa Jal has only given him the privilege of liberating al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Ikhwani, when we talk about al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, see, for some of us, we don't ever have that high ambition of freeing the masjid. We don't ever have that high ambition, or we've never thought about it. As a matter of fact, most of us, when the bombing will stop, or when the bombing stops and there's a ceasefire, we completely forget about the people of Gaza. Just like we forgot about the people of Syria for now, the people of Rohingya, the Uyghurs, Iraq, Afghanistan, the brothers and sisters around Sierra Leone, and everywhere in the world. Wherever we go, we've forgotten about our brothers. Now when there's an opportunity for us to do something like making dua, like donating and giving on their behalf, don't think for 1 second that you are doing anyone a favor. As a matter of fact, when you donate and when you give and when you make dua, this is for you in front of Allah Azza wa Jal, so you are not punished. Because if you were to come on the Day of Judgment and Allah Azza wa Jal would ask you what have you done, and you bakhilt, you've held back your money, you've held back your du'as, Allah Azza wa Jal will punish you. What we do here, what we do when we talk about al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, when we talk about people like Salahuddin, we are just doing our part. So when we stand in front of Allah Azza wa Jal, we are not punished. We're not going to be rewarded for freeing al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, because none of us have ever thought that far. We're not going to be rewarded for crying about al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, because how many of us have actually cried? This is only freeing ourselves in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. So today, when there's an opportunity to make dua, make dua. When we know it's the last hour is hopefully the accepted hour in Salat al-Jumu'ah and Yawm al-Jumu'ah, make dua. For every single Muslim brother and sister that is struggling. When you see the brothers and sisters with the card machines and the buckets asking you to donate for the people of Palestine, don't think you are helping the people of Palestine. You are helping yourself in front of Allah Azza wa Jal, saying, Wallahi, I have done the bare minimum, absolute least of al-Iman. Because this is what we need to do to make sure that we are not punished with those that have let down al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. This is our place, this is our heritage. And it will return to the people of Islam, inshallah. However, up until that point of return, this isn't a message to say, you know what, we're going to return al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and let's destroy and break down and do everything. No. Up until the point of returning al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, we do what the likes of Salahuddin Al-Ayoubi, Nureddin Zinki and the likes of these did. They made dua sincerely to Allah Azza wa Jal. They gave whatever they could to support their people. They made dua up until the point that they would cry, and they would pray every single way, and they would unite on the word of Allah Azza wa Jal, on the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would follow what he sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught them. Salahuddin Al-Ayoubi that we speak about as a military man, it said that for 40 years he didn't miss Salat al-Jama'ah. Even when he was dying, they said they would carry him to the masjid and he would struggle to stand up and he would still be there before the Imam for Salat al-Jama'ah. We are fit, we are healthy. Where are we from Salat al-Fajr in the masjid? Where are you from the du'as that you are making for the oppressed? Where are you from your money going around and donating it? This man Salahuddin Al-Ayoubi, when he died, he had 47 dirhams to his name, the equivalent of a couple of pounds. This is a man that conquered Egypt, liberated Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, conquered Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and ruled over all of that area, dying with a couple of pounds worth of money to his name. When he went to conquer Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, it said that he gave away everything, that he didn't even find a horse to ride himself. He had to borrow a horse and someone had to give him a horse. These are the heroes of Islam that Allah Azza wa Jal has aided Islam with, and Allah Azza wa Jal will continue to aid Islam with. But for us, let us play our role, let us make our dua, let's donate on our way out and support the people that are struggling and the people that are going to be needing our donations, our dua, our help for the next few months and next few years, and never forget those that are oppressed from our du'as, inshallah, wherever we can and whenever we can. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. أيها المسلمون إن الله أمركم بأمر بدأ فيه بنفسه وثنى بملائكته وثلث بكم أيها المسلمون فقال إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم ارفع البلاء عن إخواننا في فلسطين. اللهم ارفع البلاء عن إخواننا في فلسطين. اللهم ارفع البلاء عن إخواننا في فلسطين. اللهم طهر المسجد الأقصى. اللهم طهر المسجد الأقصى. اللهم طهر المسجد الأقصى. اللهم كن للطغاة المعتدين. اللهم كن لهم. اللهم شتت جمعهم. اللهم يا رب لا توحد لهم كلمة. اللهم سهل لهذا الدين يوم عز يذل فيه أهل معصيتك ويعز فيه أهل طاعتك يا رب العالمين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة.